The first thing I noticed was her hands, not in a casual glance way, in a way that made the air between us feel heavy, like it was holding its breath. She was standing in my tiny apartment doorway, a late afternoon sun catching the streaks of silver in her hair, and I swear for a moment I forgot how to breathe. "I didn't expect anyone today," she said, voice low, almost hesitant. She stepped in, brushing past me like she belonged, though I wasn't sure she did. My heart raced, but not in a panic, more like it had been waiting for this exact moment without knowing it. She was in her mid-40s, poised but undeniably human, the kind of beauty that didn't shout for attention, but lingered in corners of your thoughts until you couldn't ignore it. And me? I was 24, still figuring out where my own edges ended and the world's began. Standing there, watching her, I felt the pull of something I shouldn't, something reckless, but impossible to resist. We hadn't planned this meeting. I had texted her once, a casual coffee, and she had shown up anyway, carrying a bag of groceries I didn't remember asking for. There was that moment when she handed me the bag and our fingers brushed, a fleeting touch, but it sent sparks crawling up my arm and lodged somewhere deep in my chest. I wanted to apologize for feeling so alive, but I couldn't. "Is this okay?" she asked, her eyes darting toward the kitchen as if questioning the state of my apartment was safer than looking at me. She leaned against the counter, her posture just slightly too relaxed, and my pulse went wild. I nodded, voice caught somewhere between confident and trembling. The room smelled faintly of coffee and something floral. Perfume or candle, I wasn't sure, and for a second the world shrank to that corner, to her, to the rhythm of her breathing. I wanted to say something smart, something witty, but instead I just watched her. She laughed softly at some private thought, and I felt like I'd been punched with air, trying not to let her see how affected I was. She moved closer, tilting her head, and suddenly the space between us vanished. My chest felt exposed, too loud. "Feel that?" she whispered, pressing her hand flat against my shirt, right over my heart. My stomach dropped, my breath hitched, and she just watched me, patient, teasing, knowing. I could feel the warmth of her hand seeping through my shirt, the faint tremor of her fingers, the deliberate weight of it. I wanted to speak, to laugh, to say something ridiculous, but nothing came out. She smiled slightly, the kind of smile that hinted at unspoken stories, at regrets, at longings too complicated to untangle. And then the quiet broke. A sharp ding from my phone made both of us jump. The sound seemed absurd in contrast to the tension in the room. I glanced at the screen, a message from someone I shouldn't have expected. "Are you alone?" Her eyes caught mine again, intense and unreadable. A question hung there, unsaid but understood, and I realized in that instant that everything had changed. The air felt thicker, the room smaller, and my heartbeat was hers to command. And then, just as I thought I might step back or speak, the doorbell rang. The doorbell had rung again, insistent this time, and I realized neither of us moved. She lingered near the counter, fingers brushing absent-mindedly over the edge of the granite, like she was grounding herself. I wanted to ask who it could be, but the word stuck. She had a past. I knew that, vaguely, from the few things she'd let slip in conversations over coffee or chance encounters at the bookstore. "Divorced," she once said, eyes tightening. It wasn't messy, just permanent. There was a weight in that, like she'd carried someone else's absence longer than she should have. And me? I'd never been much of a dater, flinching from vulnerability, hiding behind casual charm and late-night gym sessions. But with her, all that pretense felt stupidly inadequate. I caught myself stealing glances at her profile, the curve of her jaw, the faint laugh lines at her eyes. She was older, yes, and the thought should have anchored me in reality, should have reminded me of the impossibility of wanting her this way. But instead, I felt the pull of something stubborn, relentless, impossible to name without sounding ridiculous. She cleared her throat. "You live here alone?" The words were simple, but I noticed the way her hand twitched, betraying a curiosity she wasn't admitting. I nodded, and she exhaled softly, a sound halfway between relief and something else I couldn't place. For a fleeting moment, I imagined her life beyond my tiny apartment, the quiet dinners she cooked alone, the errands, the evenings spent reading with only the hum of a fridge for company. And suddenly I wanted to be in that world, even if just for a night. But I also knew how dangerous that desire was. Age wasn't the only boundary. Society whispered it in hushed tones. Our differences, the judgments, the questions we couldn't answer without shame. I shifted, trying to sound casual. You ever regret anything? The question surprised me even as it left my lips. She paused, tracing the rim of a coffee mug with her finger. Sometimes, she admitted finally. Regret is tricky. It lingers in ways you don't expect. But then, she lifted her eyes to mine, soft, unguarded, and the corner of her mouth lifted almost imperceptibly. Sometimes it teaches you what to notice. I swallowed hard. She was saying more than she intended, and I felt it in my chest. A subtle tug I couldn't resist. My hand itched to reach out, to close the space between us. But I hesitated. I didn't want to ruin whatever fragile equilibrium existed. And yet, the moment found us. She leaned just slightly closer, enough that our arms brushed. A spark shot up my arm, like static electricity, and I realized the brush wasn't accidental. I wanted to freeze it in time, memorize it, feel it again and again. I could feel her exhale, a whisper of warmth, and it mingled with the scent of her hair. You always notice the little things, she murmured, almost to herself, almost a confession. I wanted to tell her I noticed her, every part, but the words stayed tucked behind my ribs. Instead, I let my fingers linger near hers on the counter, just close enough to feel the heat radiating from her hand without touching. The silence stretched between us, heavy, fragile, and intimate, and for the first time, I realized I didn't want to break it. Not yet. The knock at the door came again, sharper this time, and I jumped. She froze too, and for a moment I thought we might both vanish into the shadows. I hadn't expected anyone else today. She hadn't mentioned a visitor. Stay here, she whispered, voice barely audible. Her hand brushed mine as she passed, sending a jolt straight through me. I wanted to grab her, hold her close, but I stayed frozen, half in awe, half terrified of crossing a line. The door opened to reveal my roommate, holding a bag of groceries and a look that suggested he'd walked into a storm he wasn't prepared for. Sorry, didn't mean to. His words trailed off when he noticed her. She straightened, smile polite but guarded. Hello, she said, voice calm but tinged with something I couldn't place. Charm? Control? I felt my stomach tighten. Hey, I muttered, trying to sound casual, but my pulse betrayed me. Every inch of the room seemed smaller, hotter, charged. The roommate gave me a questioning look and shuffled out, mumbling about putting groceries away. The moment the door closed, her eyes snapped to mine. You weren't planning to tell anyone, were you? I opened my mouth, closed it, and tried again. I don't know. It didn't feel like a secret, I said, but even as I spoke, I felt the tension coil tighter between us. She stepped closer, just enough that her shoulder brushed mine, and I could feel the warmth radiating from her. My hands itched to reach for her face, to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, but the thought of the world watching, of judgment pressing in from every corner, froze me. I shouldn't be here, she murmured, almost to herself, almost like a warning. But then her lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. And yet, she lingered. Her eyes held mine, searching, daring, but also careful, like she was testing the boundaries of something neither of us fully understood. I could feel the pull, reckless, magnetic, and it terrified me. I wanted to lean in, to close the distance, but a voice in my head screamed that it was wrong. And yet, I couldn't move away. My chest ached with desire and fear. Guilt coiled around my ribs like an invisible chain. She shifted, brushing her hand against mine again. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, but my heart flared. You notice everything, don't you? She said softly, her gaze flicking to my lips before returning to my eyes. I can't help it, I whispered, though it sounded more like a surrender than an answer. A sudden noise from the street made us both jump. I realized how close we were, so close that if either of us moved a fraction, everything would tip. And I wanted to. I wanted to close the space between us until the world didn't exist outside this room. But the knock on the door, louder this time, insistent, yanked us back, reminding us that reality had rules we couldn't ignore. She pressed her hand to my chest again, just above my heart, lingering in a way that left no doubt we were both feeling something we shouldn't. I swallowed, trying to steady my racing pulse. "Who is it?" I whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, her lips curved into that dangerous, unreadable smile. And suddenly, the room felt unbearably small. The doorbell had stopped ringing, but the silence afterward was worse. Heavy, expectant, like the room itself was holding its breath. She still pressed her hand to my chest, lingering above my heart, and I felt every beat as if it were shouting my name. "I shouldn't," she whispered, voice barely audible. Her eyes darted toward the window, then back to mine, searching for something she wouldn't say. I could feel the tension knotting inside me, twisting with desire, fear, and something I didn't want to name aloud. "Shouldn't what?" I asked, though my voice cracked, betraying how much I wanted her to answer, wanted her to stay. Her fingers flexed, brushing lightly against the fabric of my shirt. That simple touch made my stomach drop, a mix of longing and panic curling in my chest. I wanted to close the distance, to lean in and let the world fall away, but some small, rational voice warned me. This was dangerous. And yet, she let out a soft sigh and laughed, bitter and self-aware. "You don't know how reckless this is, do you?" Her lips quivered. She wasn't angry. Not really. But the tension in her jaw, the tilt of her head, the tremor in her hand spoke of restraint about to break. "I don't care," I said before I could stop myself. And immediately, the words hung there between us, raw and loud. Her eyes widened slightly, caught off guard. "You don't care?" Her tone was disbelief laced with worry, almost pleading. And then she laughed softly again, a sound that made my chest ache. "You have no idea what you're saying." "I think I do," I whispered, voice hoarse. "I know I want." I stopped, words failing me. My pulse hammered, and she noticed. She always noticed. She shook her head, almost imperceptibly, stepping just a fraction back, enough to create space, but not enough to let go. "I can't," she murmured. And then her hand drifted slightly down, lingering near mine, a silent question I felt in my bones. I wanted to reach for her, wanted to pull her closer until there was no room for hesitation or rules. But guilt flared, the knowledge that this attraction, though irresistible, was complicated, perhaps wrong, filled me with panic. And then the subtle twist hit me. I'd caught a flash of something on her phone, lying face down on the counter before she'd tucked it into her bag. A text, perhaps, or a message, something that hinted at a life she hadn't shared, a life that might snap apart everything delicate between us. Her eyes met mine again, softer now, haunted, and for the first time I saw her fear as clearly as I felt my own. The weight of it pressed down, but it didn't push me away. It pulled me closer. We stood there, breathing in the same charged air, hands nearly touching, hearts hammering in secret synchrony. The room was impossibly quiet except for our pulses, quick and desperate. And then, just as I felt my resolve about to shatter, there was movement outside the door. Footsteps. Someone approaching. She pressed her hand against my chest one last time, eyes wide, lips parted. Her gaze burned into mine with everything she wasn't saying, everything we both wanted but couldn't yet. "Don't," she whispered. And in that instant, everything hung on the edge, waiting for a choice neither of us could yet make. The doorbell had stopped ringing, but the silence afterward was worse. Heavy, expectant, like the room itself was holding its breath. She still pressed her hand to my chest, lingering above my heart, and I felt every beat as if it were shouting my name. "I shouldn't," she whispered, voice barely audible. Her eyes darted toward the window, then back to mine, searching for something she wouldn't say. I could feel the tension knotting inside me, twisting with desire, fear, and something I didn't want to name aloud. "Shouldn't what?" I asked, though my voice cracked, betraying how much I wanted her to answer, wanted her to stay. Her fingers flexed, brushing lightly against the fabric of my shirt. That simple touch made my stomach drop, a mix of longing and panic curling in my chest. I wanted to close the distance, to lean in and let the world fall away, but some small, rational voice warned me. This was dangerous. And yet, she let out a soft sigh and laughed, bitter and self-aware. You don't know how reckless this is, do you? Her lips quivered. She wasn't angry. Not really. But the tension in her jaw, the tilt of her head, the tremor in her hand spoke of restraint about to break. I don't care, I said before I could stop myself. And immediately, the words hung there between us, raw and loud. Her eyes widened slightly, caught off guard. You don't care? Her tone was disbelief laced with worry, almost pleading. And then she laughed softly again, a sound that made my chest ache. You have no idea what you're saying. I think I do, I whispered, voice hoarse. I know I want. I stopped, words failing me. My pulse hammered, and she noticed. She always noticed. She shook her head, almost imperceptibly, stepping just a fraction back, enough to create space, but not enough to let go. I can't, she murmured. And then her hand drifted slightly down, lingering near mine, a silent question I felt in my bones. I wanted to reach for her, wanted to pull her closer until there was no room for hesitation or rules. But guilt flared, the knowledge that this attraction, though irresistible, was complicated, perhaps wrong, filled me with panic. And then the subtle twist hit me. I'd caught a flash of something on her phone, lying face down on the counter before she'd tucked it into her bag. A text, perhaps, or a message, something that hinted at a life she hadn't shared, a life that might snap apart everything delicate between us. Her eyes met mine again, softer now, haunted, and for the first time I saw her fear as clearly as I felt my own. The weight of it pressed down, but it didn't push me away. It pulled me closer. We stood there, breathing in the same charged air, hands nearly touching, hearts hammering in secret synchrony. The room was impossibly quiet except for our pulses, quick and desperate. And then, just as I felt my resolve about to shatter, there was movement outside the door. Footsteps. Someone approaching. She pressed her hand against my chest one last time, eyes wide, lips parted. Her gaze burned into mine with everything she wasn't saying, everything we both wanted but couldn't yet. Don't, she whispered. And in that instant, everything hung on the edge, waiting for a choice neither of us could yet make. The footsteps outside stopped. My heart lurched, caught halfway between relief and panic. But when the door swung open, it wasn't who I expected. Her daughter stood there, mid-20s, arms crossed, eyes sharp and calculating. Mom, she said, voice steady but with an edge I didn't like. We need to talk. The air shifted, suddenly electric and dangerous. I could feel her flinch just slightly, a subtle tightening at her shoulders, the fraction of hesitation in her gaze. And I knew immediately that whatever fragile space we'd carved out, it had just been invaded. What's going on? I asked, trying to sound casual, failing completely. My chest felt tight, my pulse threatening to betray me. She swallowed, eyes flicking to me and back to her daughter. It's nothing, she started, but her words were clipped, defensive. I could sense the lie, feel it thrumming in the room like a live wire. Her daughter stepped closer, ignoring me entirely. It's not nothing, she said. I saw the texts. Her eyes narrowed, scanning for a reaction. I know what's happening. Time seemed to slow. My brain froze in panic while my chest burned with a mix of fear, desire, and guilt. She pressed her hand to my chest instinctively, the same hand that had sent shocks through me all afternoon, as if trying to anchor herself, or me. It's complicated, she said finally, voice shaking. I'd never heard her sound this vulnerable. It's not what you think, and yet, her eyes met mine, burning with all the things she couldn't say aloud. Her daughter's gaze flicked between us, sharp and accusatory, and I realized the impossible truth. What we had felt safe exploring, the tension we'd shared in secret, was no longer ours alone. Someone had seen it, someone had judged it, and now everything felt raw and exposed. I started, but the words failed. I wanted to explain, justify, reach across the room, but every instinct warned me to stay still. She squeezed my hand lightly, and I felt the warmth, the courage, the subtle plea not to flee. Her daughter's expression softened, just slightly, but the damage was done. Questions hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. Who am I to her? Who are you to me? Can this survive judgment, distance, reality itself? She stepped closer, pressing just enough to brush her lips against my temple. A whisper of what might be, a promise without words. My pulse surged, heart hammering against her hand. I wanted to say something bold, something reckless, but the weight of exposure, of potential heartbreak, froze me. She leaned into me anyway, letting the unspoken confession float between us. And then, her phone buzzed on the counter. A single message previewed. I saw everything. We need to talk. Her hand tightened on my chest. My stomach flipped. The fragile tether we had built was on the verge of snapping. And in that silence, that heartbeat of tension, I realized just how far we'd come, and how dangerously close we were to losing everything. The apartment was quiet again, but it felt different, heavier, charged. Her hand still rested on my chest, but now it trembled, betraying the war she was waging inside herself. I could see it in her eyes. Fear, longing, regret, desire, all tangled together in a way I recognized as entirely human. I can't lie to myself anymore, she murmured. Her voice was barely audible, but it cut straight through the knot of tension in my chest. She took a slow breath, as if gathering courage from somewhere deep inside. I wanted to say something smart, something convincing, but the words stuck. Instead, I let my fingers hover near hers, waiting, hoping. You've made me notice, she said finally, her eyes searching mine. Things I didn't want to admit. About myself, about what I want, about what I lost. Her fingers flexed against my shirt, and I felt her pulse through the thin fabric. I swallowed. I noticed you, I whispered. Since the first moment. More than I should. But it doesn't feel like regret. It feels like I trailed off, unable to put into words what she already seemed to understand. A small, rueful smile tugged at her lips. Dangerous, she said softly, and I laughed quietly, a hollow, relieved sound. Yes, she added, dangerous and foolish. But it feels alive. She leaned closer, just enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her, close enough to know that nothing in the world mattered outside this room. I wanted to reach for her, to close the distance, but part of me hesitated, the part that knew how messy this could be, how fragile. Do we dare? I asked, voice shaking. The question hung in the air, fragile as glass. Her eyes met mine, unwavering now. I think we have to, she said, letting her hand linger on my chest, pressing a little more firmly, as if anchoring both of us to this single moment. Time slowed. I felt the pull, the gravity of her gaze, the gentle weight of her hand. I leaned in, careful at first, savoring the anticipation. She mirrored me, leaning closer, the air between us taut and electric. And then, almost imperceptibly, she paused. Her forehead brushed mine, warm and soft, and she whispered, "Are we ready to risk it?" I wanted to answer, to say yes, to throw caution to the wind, but words felt meaningless compared to the thrum of our hearts in unison. I simply pressed my forehead against hers and let the silence speak. The room seemed to shrink, and for a heartbeat, it was only us, two flawed, human beings, tangled in the messy, reckless gravity of noticing each other, truly, fully. Outside, life continued. The world with its judgments, interruptions, expectations. But here, in this suspended moment, nothing else mattered. And then she smiled, a small, secretive curve of her lips, and I knew we had crossed some invisible line. What came next was uncertain, terrifying, thrilling, inevitable, but for the first time, we understood each other completely. We could step forward together or fall apart. The morning light crept through the blinds, soft and hesitant, washing the apartment in pale gold. She was sitting on the couch, knees tucked under her, a mug of coffee warming her hands. I lingered in the doorway, watching her, wondering how a single night, a handful of hours, could have changed everything. "Good morning," I said softly. My voice sounded fragile even to me. She looked up, startled, then smiled, the kind of smile that made the room feel alive. "Morning," she replied, voice calm but carrying that hint of mischief I loved. We didn't rush. There was no grand confession, no dramatic leap, just a quiet, mutual acknowledgement that the lines we'd feared crossing were behind us. I moved closer and sat beside her, our shoulders brushing. The warmth of her body against mine felt like permission, like acceptance, and my chest loosened, finally able to breathe without tension. "I wasn't sure we could," she murmured, fingers wrapping loosely around mine. "But here we are." I squeezed gently, afraid to break the fragile thread that connected us. "We are," I said, "and somehow it feels right. Even if it's complicated, even if it's messy." She tilted her head, eyes thoughtful, tracing some invisible pattern on the rug. "Messy, yes. Human, too. And maybe that's exactly what we needed, to be real, with no masks." We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, feeling the shared pulse of something tender and precarious between us. My mind wandered to the mistakes of the past, her regrets, my own hesitations, and I realized that none of it mattered now. Not the what-ifs, not the warnings, not the judgments. What mattered was here, now, in this shared warmth, in this fragile understanding. She reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear, and the gesture was intimate, ordinary, perfect. I wanted to memorize it forever. "I noticed you first," she said softly, almost as a confession, almost a challenge. "And I'm glad I did." I laughed quietly, heart full, nerves still tingling. "I noticed you too. Always." There was no dramatic climax, no fireworks. Just this, quiet, real, a slow bloom of connection that neither of us could deny. And for the first time, the world outside seemed less imposing, less judgmental, because we had claimed our own small space inside it. As she leaned against me, and I wrapped my arm around her, I knew the future was uncertain. There would be challenges, whispers, moments of doubt. But for now, we were together, and that was enough. And as the sunlight spilled across the floor, I couldn't stop thinking. Maybe love doesn't need to be perfect. Maybe it just needs courage, honesty, and the willingness to notice each other, truly, completely.